Hello, my name is Thanias Silgalis, Product Manager for AS Interface Products at Pepperell & Fuchs. Today we continue our webinar series with Topic 4, Integrating AS Interface into a Rockwell PLC. Our agenda for the presentation today has been broken down into the following topics. First, we begin by discussing the layered architecture of automation. We will show some slides how AS Interface is a subsystem to a PLC. Next, we will introduce the toolkit by discussing where it can be downloaded, which AS Interface gateways are supported, and how to take advantage of its contents. Finally, we will finish the webinar by highlighting the latest marketing collateral we have released on AS Interface. A layered architecture of an automation system may consist of 3 layers. The highest layer of the architecture is the control network. Sometimes this layer is also referred to as the higher level bus, where the PLC resides. Protocols at this level are Ethernet IP, Profinet, CC-Link, Modbus TCP. The middle layer of the architecture is the device network. Sometimes this layer is referred to as the field bus layer. Protocols at this layer have existed for quite some time and include DeviceNet in Rockwell applications or Profibus in Siemens applications. The lowest layer of the architecture is the sensor and actuator network. This is where AS Interface networks reside. This layer is rather unique in that Pepperell & Fuchs offers a variety of gateways that enable communications to either layer above. Now, let's look at 2 scenarios where AS Interface is shown as a subsystem to the PLC. In both scenarios, the actuator and sensor network is established at the lower level. As we discussed in the last webinar, the K30 gateway is the best way to get AS Interface safety diagnostics reported back to the PLC. The dual network gateway controls the AS Interface system and, more importantly, makes the process data available to the higher level network of the PLC in a defined configuration. It is important to note that the K30 gateway can be easily replaced by a K20 gateway if no safety is required on the AS Interface network. The following slide shows another way to get safety with AS Interface. However, in this scenario, the K20 gateway is separate from the KE4 safety monitor. The K20 gateway still controls the AS Interface standard inputs and outputs and makes this data available to the higher level network of the PLC. However, in this case, the KE4 safety monitor is needed for the safety diagnostics that are desired back at the PLC. The safety program created in Simon Plus software resides in the KE4 safety monitor. I am excited to share with you that Pepperell & Fuchs has released an AS Interface toolkit intended to help a PLC programmer by providing all the necessary tools for integrating AS Interface into a Rockwell PLC. Let's review what contents make up this toolkit. First, EDS files or electronic data sheets are provided so that the AS Interface gateway being used in your project can be recognized in the RSLogix 5000 editor. Second, AS Interface description files are provided for various gateways such that the mapping of each controller tag is clearly defined. Finally, the toolkit provides add-on instructions to help reduce programming and enable additional AS Interface diagnostics to be collected at the PLC. Let me point out that the AS Interface toolkit is only supported with 3-EV gateways. To assure you have the latest EDS file, be sure to use the EDS files at revision 1.5. One significant improvement with these latest EDS files is how much the mapping selections within the PLC have been reduced. What now is easier for the programmer is that only 3 mappings are needed to support each AS Interface gateway. For smaller AS Interface networks with no safety, select the following gateway. For larger AS interface networks, still with no safety, select the next gateway. And finally, for larger AS interface networks where safety is required, select the last gateway. PDF cheat sheets are also available to help outline the 16-bit words for your AS interface devices in the PLC. Also included in the AS Interface Toolkit are 9 description files available based on the -EV AS Interface Gateway selection. These description files are very helpful because they could be easily imported into RSLogix 5000 for mapping translation. As we look at the live demonstration, we will see the value of these description files. The final contents provided in the AS Interface Toolkit is a very handy add-on instruction. This instruction allows you to read additional diagnostics on AS Interface. Such items include slave list, network diagnostic lists, error counters, duplicate address lists, and even fault detection. Let's see just how easy it is to integrate an AS Interface gateway into a Rockwell PLC that resides at the higher level bus. This slide outlines the 5 steps needed to make this successful. These steps include: first, download the toolkit. Then register the EDS file. Define gateway mapping. Import description files. And finally, view input and output status. So our first step in the process is to find the AS Interface Toolkit. We'll start by downloading the toolkit from the URL provided and select one of the following gateways. So first, let's begin by launching the Internet browser. Next, we'll look for the Pepperl & Fuchs website. In the search field provided, we will enter in the part number for our AS Interface gateway. I shortened the search and it provided back 2 gateways. The gateway that supports the AS Interface Toolkit is the -EV gateway, so that will be the one that we select. As we make that selection, there will be a set of tabs available to select from. We will pick the Software tab. And under the Software tab, Drivers, we have our AS Interface Toolkit available for download. Step 2 of our process is registering EDS files. For this registration process, we need to establish an identity for our AS Interface Gateway in RSLogix 5000. So to register our EDS files, we need to begin by launching RSLogix 5000 on our laptop. In our example, we need to begin by selecting the controller which we are using. In our case, we will be using a CompactLogix L35E controller, and note the revision is revision 20. We will add a simple test file name to the project and click OK. The editor opens up. Step 2 of the process was registering the EDS files. So in registering the EDS files, we need to begin by clicking on Tools, EDS Hardware Installation Tool. From there, a wizard launches where we simply select Next. Here we will select the default option of registering an EDS file. Click Next. Since we have multiple EDS files we want to register, we're going to select Register a Directory of EDS files. From there, we will browse to the location where we've put our AS Interface Toolkit. Under the AS Interface Toolkit folder, we'll see our EDS files Rev 1.5, and we'll select that folder and click OK. At this point, when we click Next, our 3 EDS files will be registered accordingly. and we have completed the registration process. So step 3 of our process is now to define the gateway mapping. Since we have registered our EDS files in step 2, now we are able to add a certain module. So as we go down in the I/O configuration tree, we will select on the Ethernet port, right-clicking on it, and selecting New Module. As we select the new module, the window that appears are the registered EDS files for the 3 various gateways represented. This will allow us to make a selection for one of these gateways in our I/O configuration. So back in the RSLogix 5000 editor, what we will do is under the Ethernet port, do a right-click on the Ethernet and select the new module. What we want to do is filter the number of devices represented here. So we want to simply look for our Pepperell and Fuchs folder. As we enable that, we'll see the various devices represented for Pepperell and Fuchs, be it the 3 gateways we just registered prior. In this case, what we will be doing is selecting our K30 gateway as our desired gateway of choice and creating it. So now we must name our gateway in the I/O configuration. So what we will use for the case is Gateway 1. This gateway name is very important so the description files can be imported in accurately. The next part is we do need to assign an IP address of our gateway. So our gateway is set to 172.18.10.72. Our next step is to also look at the mapping. The mapping for the gateway is actually selected here, and this is where we see some of the value of the toolkit. So as we make this selection, what we observe in the dialog box, I'll expand that out a little bit, is a number of options. This has been reduced down to only 3 selections for the programmer. In our case, since we are using a K30 gateway, it is in our best interest to still select the safety, but the 2 other options are also possible. One also important selection in this is that we want to have it set up for integer data type. And now we have our mapping options selected. We'll click the yes default, and at this point we have our gateway mapped accordingly with the assigned IP address that it's been specified for. What gets represented in our I/O tree is our gateway noted here with the name we've provided it at the IP address that it will be looked for. So now, since we've been successful in having our AS interface gateway identity established in the I/O tree, we want to look at what got represented from a controller tag perspective. So as we go in the controller organizer and select the controller tags, our corresponding input and outputs are mapped accordingly based on the mapping we selected for our AS interface gateway. However, what I want to point out is that none of these tags have any type of description associated to them. So from a PLC programming perspective, it's very difficult for the programmer to know where the AS interface nodes or slave reside. This is where we'll lead into step 4. Now with step 4, we need to import in our description files. These files show exactly where all the digital inputs and outputs are located for the various slave addresses. So now, as indicated in step 4, we will go to the toolbar and select Tools, Import, and Tags and Logic Commons. From there, we will look for our folder where we had our AS Interface Toolkit downloaded. Here we will select our AS Interface Description file folder, and noted are the 9 files provided. The selection we'll choose to use is the safety selection here. And in making this selection, based on our mapping selection, we are able to import in all the relevant descriptions for our various AS Interface nodes. So our final step in the process, step 5, is to view our descriptions for our AS Interface network. Having imported in all the relevant tags and comments, we now have a better visual of our AS Interface network at the PLC. So as we go back to our controller tags, we should see various descriptions associated to our AS interface network. These are very helpful for the PLC programmer to know where the various nodes have been mapped. If we look at the various words more at a bit level, the mapping of AS interface notes that you have 4 bits for each node address. So at this point, we've completed the process of mapping the AS interface gateway in the PLC. However, everything we've done so far is offline. So to prove that it all worked, what I want to do now is download our project down to the controller. As we look at RS Links, we need to have a driver where we have our communication successful for our gateway configured at the corresponding IP address and also our controller, be it in this case at its corresponding IP address. So in this case, the browse shows both are recognized. So as we initiate the download, we need to do the normal process of downloading our project to the controller. In this case, it recognized that it was actually an L32E controller, not an L35E. At this point, we are online with our controller. A few things to note is if we didn't have successful communication with our gateway, there'd be a yellow hazard sign indicating an unsuccessful connection. In our case, we are online with our controller and we have a successful connection to our AS interface gateway. This could also be further confirmed by the I/O OK LED being a solid green LED. So one last thing is the following. I have a node address 1 for an eStop configured on my test bench here. As we open up the input image, we look for node address 1. Where are the actual bits associated to node 1? And as we continue to open that up, we'll see those bits being represented at bits 0 through 3 here. Note, our eStop right now is released, so all the bits are set to 1. I'm going to ask Connie now to press the eStop for me, and we'll see how those bits change accordingly in the PLC. As Connie has pressed it, we'll see that all those bits turn to 0. So again, if Connie releases the eStop, those bits will all turn to 1. So this concludes the simple process of integrating an AS interface gateway into a Rockwell PLC. Finally, in the presentation today, I wanted to make you aware of some helpful marketing collateral. The first is the Maintenance and Troubleshooting Guide. This was released just recently in March of 2016. The link for the documentation is provided below. This guide provides helpful tips and tricks for troubleshooting and maintaining existing AS interface networks. I encourage you to use this guide because it also includes some helpful links to some YouTube videos that may help further in your maintaining and troubleshooting of AS interface networks. A second helpful document is the Product Overview Guide for AS Interface. This was released again this year in June 2016. The intent of this document is really to help you be able to tell the story about AS Interface and all the key components that we discussed in the presentation today. It provides a high-level overview of the product portfolio and the technical features of each of the products offered by Pepperell & Fuchs for AS Interface. So let's discuss how can you connect with us here at Pepperell & Fuchs. There are a number of ways this can be possible. First, the tech support number. I encourage each of you to call us and talk to our applications engineers that are knowledgeable on AS Interface. Through email correspondence, you could use Ask the Expert and use the email to correspond in this manner. Our website, Twitter, and blogs are also great resources of getting more information on AS Interface. Thank you for coming to the webinar today. Included on the slide is my contact information. I encourage each of you to keep in touch with me on any questions, concerns you may have on AS Interface. Thank you.